2 weeks ago, I went back to school. Some of you know this already, some of you perhaps don't, but I started a doctoral program at Drew University with a concentration in worship and preaching and Christian spirituality. During the next 3 years of this study, Broadway Church will be my laboratory. And when I do my research and when I write my thesis, it will be all about all of you. It's an exciting prospect for me, and one I hope will enlighten the whole congregation, give us some stuff to think about. I'm one of those people who has always loved school. I love the smell of the stacks. I love kicking around the dead leaves on the campus. I love the whole thing. When I arrived at school for my first day of that week-long intensive, I was full of energy and enthusiasm. I wanted to meet my classmates. I wanted to make friends. But by the end of the day, I was deflated and uncomfortable. You see, there's been a very big change since the last time I was in seminary, some 20 years ago. It's a kind of change that's happening in many of our mainline Protestant schools. Evangelicals and fundamentalists and Pentecostals are enrolling in our seminaries in large numbers. The game is changing. In my class, these folks are the majority. And to tell you the truth, it kind of freaked me out. It's like I can run, but I can't hide, you know what I mean? I've invested a lot of energy in making a new post-fundamentalist life for myself. I moved to New York City. I immediately subscribed to the New Yorker and the New York Times when I got here. I work in the most progressive denomination in the United States. I pastor all of you, for God's sake. Yet there I was, face to face with my past, stuck in between the academy and a tent revival, and unsure of which way to turn. I was stuck in the middle. And being stuck in the middle, so it seems to me, is sort of our life condition, if you think about it too much. We get stuck on a regular basis between our past and our future. We get stuck between our hopes and our realities, between our already and our not yet. We get stuck. I, like many of you, have been inspired by the events around the world, this Arab Spring that has turned into an American autumn. Regular folks like us, regular folks like some of you, gather in places like Zuccotti Park to protest a culture in which the chasm between the rich and the poor is ever widening. That is not up for debate. It's the truth. And so we protest a government that is in bed with the corporations. A government that seeks to balance its budget on the backs of the poor and the weak and the sick. Some of you, I know, have made your way downtown. Some of you have joined the protests. Maybe you've seen the pictures of clergy and non-clergy alike with the fire of Old Testament prophets carrying around a papier-mâché golden calf in the shape of the Wall Street bull. An in-your-face reminder of our idolatry, not theirs, ours. It is a great moment, I believe, but it is not a pure one. For no matter how strongly we feel about the rights of the poor, the uncomfortable truth is that most of us participate in this corporate greed that has brought us to this moment. We stand in line and clamor for every new electronic device that the corporations can produce, and we know, because we read and are intelligent people, that these devices are made by slave labor in some cases. We complain that folks who want to work can't work, and yet we continue to demand those kinds of low prices that only outsourcing can produce. We protest the corporate culture of this nature, and yet this church's endowment prospers and grows and funds ministries of health and wellness and justice and peace because the machinations of those corporations produce a profit. Like I said, we're stuck in the middle. It's interesting that today's gospel lesson is about taxes, as you heard from Laurel, and about corruption, and about being stuck in the middle. The setting is the temple in Jerusalem. The day is the Tuesday before the crucifixion, so there is all of that nervous energy. The temple, 3 days before crucifixion. Jesus has been protesting, as he often did, the disparity between the rich and the poor, the saint and the sinner, and this had greatly upset the establishment, as it always does. And so part of the establishment, the Pharisees, those experts in the law and religion, they had ganged up with the Herodians. And the Herodians were the supporters of the puppet king Herod, the man placed in power by Rome, the oppressors. And these two groups hated one another. But what happens in politics? People who hate one another go to bed with one another all of the time to get what they want. And so they laid a plot. And they asked a question in front of a whole crowd inside a holy space. "Rabbi," they said disingenuously, "we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show deference to no one. Tell us then, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" And that was a brilliant question. It was a brilliant question because it had no easy answer, as Laurel also pointed out. And here's part of the backstory to that environment. In 6 AD, when Jesus was but a little boy, a man named Judas the Galilean led a revolt against Rome, against a census tax. And as you can imagine, Judas the Galilean lost. But that anger over that moment lived inside the culture. The people never forgot it. That anger over this tax was still very much alive on this Tuesday before crucifixion. And Jesus was stuck in the middle. Because if he said, "Well, you ought to pay your taxes and be good citizens," then he would have been accused of siding with the Romans, the oppressors. It would have alienated his entire congregation. But if he said you should not pay taxes to Rome, well, then he was going to be guilty of treason. And everybody knows what the Romans did to traitors. So Jesus, not to be outfoxed, asked to see a coin, a denarius. "Whose head is on this?" he asked. "And whose title?" "The emperor's," they answered. So then Jesus said, "Give to the emperor those things that are the emperor's, and give to God those things that are God's." It was a brilliant move on Jesus' part, a strategic move, for in the simple act of asking to see a coin, Jesus exposed their hypocrisy. Jesus asked to see this coin, this denarius, and he pointed out to them that on it was the image of the emperor. And inscribed on that coin, it said on one side, "Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus." And on the other side, it said, "Pontifex Maximus," which means high priest. And in the 10 Commandments, are we not forbidden? "Thou shalt not from having anything to do with graven images? And are we not forbidden from having any other god before Yahweh? And this coin did both of those things. And these religious people trying to trap Jesus were carrying these coins in their pockets in the temple. Such hypocrisy. It was a slam dunk for Jesus. It must have made the crowds go wild, and Jesus could have stopped right then. He probably should have. This would be an easier sermon to preach if only he had, but he didn't. Instead, he offered some of the most quoted yet enigmatic words in the New Testament. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Doesn't that just roll off your tongue? What does it mean? Well, Rome minted the money. If you wanted to buy food or pay your taxes or make a donation to the temple or give some money to a beggar, you had to do it with these idolatrous coins. To give to the emperor what belonged to the emperor was, by default, to participate in an unjust culture. Not unlike what our tax dollars do when drones kill the innocent. Not unlike what our tax dollars do when banks are bailed out and veterans and poor people are foreclosed upon. And what about giving to God those things that are God's? Doesn't everything belong to God? And how do you pay your bills with that piece of advice? So this oft-quoted saying of the Lord, when you pull it apart, when you take away the fact that it rolls so easily off your tongue, leaves us without any clear advice about how we are supposed to live in these middle places of our lives. And this can leave us profoundly uncomfortable. It makes us uncomfortable because we are Western people, living in a Western culture, worshiping in a Western church. As such, we are heavily influenced by Platonic thought. In other words, we like neat and clear delineations of light and darkness, good and evil, truth and lies. But modern living rarely provides such luxuries. And this reality is forcing us as a culture and as a church to think more laterally. We are coming to understand, sometimes kicking and screaming, that the truth is often found in the tension between two extremes. People in Jesus' day, and people in our day, and people in every day long for easy answers. It's not just something conservative people do. Progressive people do it too. We make communities out of people who think alike and vote alike and argue alike. It's nice for the group, but it doesn't work out there very well. Life pushes us toward those boundaries, and we make a choice then. We choose whether or not we will listen to those people who do not agree with us. We choose to see them as people who sometimes, often, are struggling to make sense of this world like we are. And in all of those spaces we create, that is where grace comes in. Grace, that thing we need. On the last day of my class, because it was a class in sacramental theology, we celebrated the Eucharist together, black and white, male and female, conservative and liberal, and in between. It was the end of the week, and after a week I figured I knew everybody really well. Some of them I'd looked up on their church's websites. I had seen where they'd gone to school. I knew who they were. I had drawn my line in the sand with a big smile on my face, but I knew who they were. But in those moments after communion, in a time of sharing when God's Spirit had lowered our defenses just a little bit, and we were telling one another what we had learned during this week, one of those conservative people that I was sure I knew said this: I'm at a crossroads in my life. I am not sure I can remain a Christian if Christianity is what I have been taught it is. But the diversity in this room gives me hope that maybe there is a place in the church for me. You see, he found hope in the tension, in the in-between places. And as I listened to him speak, I saw myself in the mirror once again for what I can still sometimes be, which is a liberal fundamentalist. You see, I really know very little about anybody. I barely know myself. But I am learning that to live the Spirit-filled life is to live a life in between. It is to seek with all of my heart truth and justice and peace and plenty for the oppressed, but with the full knowledge that I have not yet arrived and I may be one of the oppressors and not even know it. This life in between, this life in the tension, is not an easy life, but it's a good life. It's an honest life. It's the kind of life where you will find Jesus leading us, guiding us step by step toward more faithful lives in this perplexing but very beautiful world. Thanks be to God. Amen.